You're listening to Foodagogy, where we explore what food can teach us about becoming totally inclusive schools. I'm Angeline Aow, and I believe that dynamic conversations about inclusion, diversity, and equity happen around the table. Every episode, I sit down with someone whose relationship with food reveals something essential about identity, community, and belonging. The same things we're trying to cultivate in our classrooms. Whether you are wrestling with inclusion in your institution, a foodie, curious about culinary cultures, or simply someone who believes that every child deserves to thrive at school, you belong here. Thank you for tuning into these food-related conversations that nourish both heart and pedagogical practice. Let us roll out Season 1's finale conversation, where we explore what happens when you follow your hunger. Today, I'm joined by Peter Sum, a Berlin-based food entrepreneur and founder of Kenzy Club, a series of pop-ups and supper clubs centered on the generosity and warmth of Italian cuisine. After 15 years working in tech startups, Peter made a deliberate shift toward food, choosing to build a life and practice that feels more aligned with his values. Through Kenzy Club, Peter creates intimate food experiences that prioritize connection, care, and presence around the table. I'm really excited to explore how food has become a way for Peter to build community, express identity, and rethink what success can look like. So, welcome, Peter.
Wow, thanks for having me and thank you for that amazing introduction.
So, tell us about you. Share with us your earliest food memories and what they reveal about the world you grew up in.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Peter and I was born in Vancouver, Canada. And I think my kind of earliest memories of food are very much there's two very influential figures for me when I'm growing up food wise. So the first was my grandmother. So my mother's side of the family is from Macau, and my father's is from Hong Kong, and a generation before them, it's sort of from the southern region of China. And I think there's a few things that really pop into mind. So one is early morning dim sum with my grandparents. And so this is like 9 a.m. when you can still get the 20% discount when you show up early and get dim sum. And I just remember going with family and being amazed by all the selection of dim sum that you could have and being able to try all these different things. And I have really, really fond memories of kind of going to these places and just immersing myself in the world of food. And at home, my grandmother would cook a lot of Chinese food that we'd yeah, just eat over the dinner table. And oftentimes we'd have family dinners over at her place where 30, 40 people would gather together, and you would just, see this warmth of just being able to bring people together and have, amazing kind of connections over food. And my dad actually moved to Canada when he was quite young. So he was around, I think, 16 or 17 when he moved to Canada, starting in Montreal. And he didn't have such a great memory of growing up in Hong Kong. And so when he moved to Canada, I think he really embraced Western culture, Western values. And so the way that kind of translated into food for me growing up was that we ate a very wide variety of food. My dad was the chef in the kitchen, and he would cook things from all over the world. And so as much as I was kind of exposed to Chinese cuisine and Chinese cooking through my grandmother, through my dad, I was able to kind of have a lot more of a broad exposure to food from around the world. And so that was very influential for me as well growing up, just being able to taste flavors and ingredients that weren't just kind of limited to my Chinese heritage. So both of those are kind of very influential for me growing up. And I was a chubby little Asian kid growing up, eating more than my fair share at the dinner table, just always excited about tasting things. And I think my love of food started very early.
Thank you so much for sharing those rich memories. And it sounds like through your grandmother, there was a lot of like cultural wealth that was passed on, and through your parents' migration to Canada,
Hmm.
that has also, and they're, you know, settling into a completely new culture and the influences that were there that have also now then influenced who you are. Were you born in Canada? And
Yeah, born
yeah.
in Vancouver.
Yeah, as well. And so, and then that would make you like a second generation, migrant, and how we inherit these cultures when we have multiple generations kind of really interacting with each other in a community, learning from each other in those ways, but also influenced by your immediate surroundings. And you mentioned that you grew up in Vancouver, which I'd love to visit. I have never been, but I've heard people call it Hongcouver, which is like Hong Kong, and there's
Yes.
like a strong, influence of the cultures you also have and inherited as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Vancouver is one of these hubs where when there was a lot of when China wasn't open to the world for a period of time and a lot of migration was happening sort of from Hong Kong to the world, a lot of like these very technical chefs actually moved to Vancouver, and there's this kind of cuisine that emerged in Vancouver actually that is actually not even that common in Hong Kong anymore, but these chefs kind of moved to Vancouver, and so I grew up eating some really amazing, tasty Cantonese dishes. So I was lucky to kind of, yeah, that kind of happened in that way. But also just in terms of you're talking about like food and culture, I find that food is such an approachable way to learn about different cultures. And maybe like another defining moment for me, food wise, was when I actually started traveling abroad. And I still remember visiting these places where food is really at the heart of the cultures there. So, for instance, Mexico City, Malaysia, Istanbul. I have a lot of really fond memories of just my mind opening, seeing different points of view, and food being sort of a really big driver of that. And so it was also very kind of influential on me to travel, see more of the world. And food was this like really approachable way for me to learn about other cultures and, the way people lived and how they ate at the family table and all this type of stuff. So,
And some of the places you mentioned that you traveled, like Malaysia, Istanbul, they were very much at the intersections of, East, West, and a lot of
mhm.
multiculturalism and many different, strong ethnicities, cultures, and food cultures living all in the one place over long periods of time as well. And so that also brings a certain uniqueness to
Yeah,
each
organic
place.
fusion food.
Yeah, that's right. And as I mentioned in your introduction, you started a career in tech, but you made a significant shift into food. And so tell us about Kenzie.
Yeah. So my background, I was building sort of early stage startups, tech companies, and I'd done it for 15 years, like you mentioned. And I distinctly remember I was turning 34. So it was my 34th birthday. And I did a little reflection of just, I'd been in this industry for 15 years. I feel like because I was in that career for so long, I could imagine what it would look like if I was to continue down that path. So I was in marketing and growth, more of like a business function within these companies. And I could see myself maybe, continuing to get promoted, becoming, a VP or CMO of a tech company. And I feel like I had a pretty good understanding of what that would look like. And it just didn't feel like something that I was meant to do. And I think a lot of it kind of, I started asking myself the question of like, okay, well, what do I feel like is my unique perspective on the world? What do I love more than the average person next to me? And it's always been food. And so I was like, why don't I just give myself 6 months to a year to take a step away from my career and to see if I could make food my life? People talk about passions and having your passion be your side thing. I was like, well, what could it look like if it was my main thing? And so I started this journey into food without really knowing where it was going. It was just this intention of spending more time doing what I loved. And it kind of organically grew from there. I was cooking at home. Then I started working at different pop ups here in Berlin. And then I went to Italy for 3 months for cooking school in Italy. And when I came back, I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot to just try and build my own food business. And that ended up being Kenzy. And that as well was very organic. It was like I had a friend over for dinner and I was like, I want to start, doing maybe some supper clubs or food projects. She's like, you have a beautiful space here. Why don't you just try and like host some people at your place? And I was like, that seems like a great idea. It's low risk. I don't have to think about, renting out an extra space, which comes with all the risks around that. So, and then from there, it just kind of has grown again very organically. Like I'm inspired by an idea. I feel like this is something that I am curious about doing. Then I kind of test it out and see. And it feels like food somehow has been a very almost like a flow state where I feel like opportunities are just naturally arising and maybe I understand myself better at this stage, but it just feels like the right opportunity just seems to come along. I'm not trying to force anything. And right when I start to think about, oh, I need to think about the next thing, something just kind of comes along that feels right. And yeah, today I'm, doing a bunch of different things. I teach pasta workshops. I run these supper clubs. I run different types of events. I'm starting to collaborate more with different food businesses in the city and still don't know where everything is going long term. I feel that I'm just much more present right now and just trying to take things step by step, but really loving it so far.
It sounds like you have come to a stage where you know what you don't want, and you're able to live in the present moment where one thing is leading to another. And rather than chasing, what we think we should want, you're kind of saying, well, okay, I have a plan for now. I'm teaching pastor workshops, I'm collaborating with a few people. This is what I want right now. Let's see how that goes before they take the next step.
Yeah, I think I feel like around the time I turned 30 and moved to Berlin, there was also this big wave of spiritual growth for myself. And a lot of the lessons coming out of that was like, really trying to be in the moment, to try and not try and control life and to just listen to where life is bringing you. And I think that's really helped enable this path as well of just like letting go of needing to know where things are going, to just spend more time being conscious about what I'm feeling in a present moment and letting that guide me. And I think going through that sort of spiritual growth before going into this food business, I think was a really helpful sequence of events.
Do you think that tuning into, your feelings and where you are at this present time is helping you to actually find and stay in that flow state? Because sometimes if we're not noticing things as much that are around us, we may miss like signals that come.
Absolutely. Like I there was a mentor of mine, and he said this maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it's really stuck with me. Is that he said something along the lines of life can be really easy, but sometimes we're just too narrow minded and focused on what our plans and goals are that we don't see the easy paths around us. And I oftentimes think that like because you might set goals or you're trying to control life to move a certain way, then all of a sudden you're making these snap judgments about, oh, this aligns with my goals and where I'm going, this doesn't. And very quickly you're casting aside things that might actually be really great opportunities for you. And I think the more you're just sort of present, curious about yourself, how you're feeling, all these things can pop up that are so amazing that like you could have never planned, you could have never said, oh, this is exactly how I want things to go. But because you're sort of present enough to pay attention, then it takes you on these amazing adventures. And I very much think that like there are easier paths in front of us as long as we just kind of look up and pay attention to the different paths in front of us.
Sounds to me like when we talk about being open-minded, we quite sometimes we think that, oh, might mean valuing diversity or valuing like a different perspective. But quite often we have like our set ideas or values about different things, and then we're actually just hearing what we want to hear. And then so when things match to us, and
Mm-hmm.
so from the way you were just describing, that process of being really open without controlling is also then actually, I think, I wonder if that describes more being open minded to possibilities you didn't even think of that are actually then able to shift what your values actually are or where you want to go because yeah, when we have a set plan,
Mm.
plans can be really good because it gives us maybe some direction or focus or and sometimes we need that, as well. But if plans are completely inflexible, then is that really the best plan for an ever-changing environment?
Yes. I feel like open mindedness for me really starts with being open minded with yourself. So, like, I think we often say curiosity is a really good thing, be curious. And I think shifting that lens first and foremost to being curious about yourself, I think is a really good orientation. And I think Berlin was also very influential with this. But I think this idea of, I went through this process, and I think I'm still going through this process right now, having moved to Berlin, where I came to the realization that I had these ideas in my head, these values that maybe I believed in, that I sort of came to the conclusion that some of these things I had in my head were not necessarily my own, or I had developed an idea or a value or a belief that was from many years ago. And I feel like Berlin has created this space for me to re examine these and actually check in and see, are these still fitting the life I want to live today? And going through that and sort of updating these things and saying, oh no, this was actually maybe like 20-year-old version of me believed this, but the version I am today has actually grown and learned different things and actually sees the world a little bit differently. And so I think regularly going and checking in on some assumptions that you've made or beliefs that you have to see if they still fit the life that you want to live is a really good sort of regular practice to have in your life.
Sounds like a skill that, like you said, needed practice also
Mhm.
for it to be possible. And, you mentioned different pathways or different paths, and you've certainly, pivoted your pathway quite a fair bit. And so if you were speaking to young people who might feel pressure to, choose the right path, whatever that is, at an early stage, then what has your experience kind of suggested about maybe possibility of like which skills or learning should we actually have in schools that would help us to transfer across to multiple and different futures?
Yeah, I think the starting point, and we just kind of touched on this, is this the idea that it's becoming harder and harder to see where things are going to be in the next even 5 years, even the next 2 years. Things are changing at a very rapid pace. And so I really think that kind of shifts the horizon of how far you look into the future and try and make plans, because whatever you see today is very likely not going to be the future that comes to be. And so I think figuring out how to adapt to a world that's changing a lot faster is really important. So what we talked about earlier, like some sort of skill set of being able to like examine who you are, being curious about yourself and doing that on a very regular basis, I think is really important. It's this like making yourself the orientation. The more you sort of are curious about yourself, that becomes this stable place for you to navigate all these changes that are happening around you. So I think it's becoming harder and harder to say, like, I'm going down this one track and this is my track for the rest of my life. That might still be attainable and achievable, but I think it's becoming less and less possible. And so I think it's this ability to be open minded, to be able to adapt to things that are shifting around you, and that becomes a lot easier when you have this self orientation of like always checking in with yourself, seeing what you're learning, how you're growing, what you're inspired by, what you're curious about, and the more you kind of spend time there, the more I think it puts you in a position to be able to navigate the changes around you.
Yeah, certainly in traditional school curriculum, it's always been about, oh, here's a topic or here's a subject that you're learning. And in some school systems, it might be some of the subjects are working together on a specific, project, or
Mhm.
where it can be, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. And I think some schools are really adopting a more identity conscious approach, realizing that parallel to that, we have students for 12, 13, 14 years in the school system, or more if you count the early years, where it's their formative years. And so they're not just forming like, oh, understand math, understand language, understand science, but they're forming as human beings and as individuals, right? So the more identity conscious that we can become,
Mhm.
then the more we're also questioning, how does this bit of learning about the world, or this skill that I'm acquiring, how is it also shaping who I am and who I will become and will continue to become as we move on? And also then realizing, then how does this knowledge or skills or concepts that I will transfer into another aspect, what's make me as a person in terms of the decisions and the impact I will make with those decisions, right? So when you're taking learning and transferring it into practice, like starting your own supper club or doing your own collaboration, or even like for myself, like creating this podcast, what kind of an impact do we want to have as well, right? So
Mm.
things influence us and we also influence other things. And so, and that becomes also a part of our own identity. And so this iterative process of skills that we need, and I think, yeah, and that what you were mentioning is connecting to being more identity conscious and sense of
Yeah.
self. Yeah.
It's like you mentioned this kind of finding the right path. And I think when I was growing up, I really feel like the way we were talking about the right path was very much defined by these external things. Like the right path is going to become a doctor or whatever it is. And I feel like the shift is like the right path, it's introspective. So the right path is really looking inside yourself and figuring out tools and practicing how to look inside yourself. And that being, I feel like a more resilient way for you to kind of, yeah, move into the world coming out of school. So kind of letting go of really these clear, hard definitions of the external world of where you're going in your path and thinking more about looking inside.
Yeah, in schools, like I don't know about you, but when you're about to leave school, there was a university counselor or some sort of counselor to kind of help you find this kind of
Yeah.
right path in inverted commas, right?
Yeah.
And actually, in some schools that are recognizing this, are retitling and reframing that as a future pathways role, and that's what they call it, right? Helping you with your future pathway, whatever that may be. And also, I think, like, I always knew I wanted to be a primary school teacher, and that's what I entered into and then became, and I'm still am in education in many
Yeah.
ways. But this idea of a single career too is really like doesn't exist anymore. And this idea of transference of skills being a focus of what we need to learn in order to do that. And so, what about you, Peter? Like, what skills or ways of thinking perhaps carried over into your food work that maybe you didn't initially expect when you made this pivot?
Yeah. I find it actually super interesting as you're talking about that. Like, even though I feel like I found the right path for me now, which is like going and building my food thing, I don't believe that it's the path I should have taken all along. I don't believe that, oh, I wasted all of this time doing this other thing and I should have been doing food from the beginning. I look back and I have a lot of gratitude for having, started my career in tech, all the things that I had learned through that, the financial stability I was able to build for myself through that as well, really kind of laid the foundation for me to be able to move into this other part of my life. And so it's, like you said, it's harder and harder to imagine a world where you just kind of go down one thing and you stay there the rest of your life. And for some people that might be the case, but I think sometimes that also could potentially shift how curious you are about exploring other paths. It's like, oh, let's say you really love this thing and you want to do that, then that's also starting to become a little bit more closed-minded about other things that, potentially you could go down in life. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. And then in terms of, I'm not sure about skills that I did not expect to translate, but there are skills that I'm very grateful for that I developed before going into food. So I think one of them, what I'm finding is that food is this, it can be a very creative, artistic way of working. And many of my peers who are kind of starting food businesses right now, oftentimes there's so much passion and love for it, and so much about selflessness, so much about serving other people, that I think sometimes they get a little bit lost in terms of like how to actually think about it as a business. And so there's a lot of people in Berlin who are like starting supper clubs and charging way less than I feel like they should be charging for the amount of effort that they're putting into it. And they're oftentimes discounting all of their work and effort because they love it. It's their passion, and they want to serve food to other people. And I think having this kind of more business background, having built companies, understanding what it means to actually have a feasible business, looking at the economics, actually like being able to see how viable it is, I think has given me a little bit more of a foundation to know whether I'm building something that can actually sustain, or whether that thing is going to just, fizzle out once I run out of all of my energy and time and resources and things. So I think having sort of this, business background has actually been really helpful. And also I think tied to that was just like I oftentimes at different companies was in charge of building brands and understanding sort of what the narrative is, and the storytelling of kind of the companies and how to resonate. And so I feel like that has given me a certain amount of just understanding some of the core fundamentals about what that is. And oftentimes, the way we approach it in startups is a little bit too disingenuous. And like now, because it's just me, I feel like I'm able to actually build something that's a lot more authentic. And I really try and have that come through in everything that I do, that it makes it really feel like, you know, who I am is coming through in the way that I'm speaking to people about my food.
So tell us the story then behind Kenzie and the concept that you're building.
Yeah. So I was thinking about building this food business even while I was in Italy at culinary school. And then as I was thinking about what I wanted to do and different names and things, the name Kenzie actually comes from my little niece. I have a niece who's turning 7 this year. Her name's McKenzie. And we have this really special relationship because we spent some time living together during the pandemic. I had to let go of my place in Toronto, and I ended up living in my sister's basement for several months. And so I ended up having this close relationship with Mackenzie where I was able to observe her and how her love of food grew. And so there's this, when I think about Kenzie, it really stands for this, like, the wonder that comes with trying something for the first time, this kind of like childlike energy around like, playing with your food, being lighthearted with it. I think like just observing her and how her love of food grew, that was really the inspiration for the concept of Kenzie. And I think a lot of the energy I try and put into it is about sort of facilitating that and bringing back this like, being able to try new things and being open-minded and having this, yeah, childlike wonder around food, falling in love with something that you'd never tried before, all this type of stuff. And so that's why I decided to call it Kenzie. And it just, yeah, when the name came up, it just felt right. It felt very wholesome. It felt very warm. And so that's kind of the story behind starting that. And yeah, every time I go back, we get a chance to cook together, and I get to see sort of like how her love of food continues to grow. And yeah.
It's beautiful. It sounds like you really value having this beginner's mindset and approach to learning new things as you did with, you mentioned spending 3 months and going to Italy and learning that. And that seems to be at the heart also of Kenzie, right? The art of making pasta and mastering something and learning through doing that. So, yeah, tell me more about how you relate to that idea of the craft of pasta making. That's like not just a talent, but maybe as something that we develop over time with attention, care, even repetition.
Yeah. So I feel like when I went into food, a part of me was really searching for something that I could become obsessed over. And I guess I had this idea in my head that, people that really love food are able to find this thing that they can do over and over and over again, and it still brings them joy to continue doing it. And so I perhaps, observed, different food businesses or restaurants that I had eaten at where like I was like, wow, this person decided to dedicate their entire life to learning how to make this one thing. And I felt a curiosity to try and figure out what that was for me, something that I could, sink my teeth into to feel like the repetitions actually felt worth doing, that I was like curious and excited to continue doing it. And when I was in Italy, there was this one week where I decided to kind of stay back at school. There's like a vacation week, and everyone kind of went away and went on holidays and things. And I stuck behind, and I was like, I think I'm going to spend this one week focusing on seeing if I can find this obsession. And my idea was to make pasta because something called me to it. It felt like this canvas where you could be endlessly creative, where there's all these different shapes and different patterns you can make, different fillings. And so I felt like pasta was one of these places that I felt like I could really invest time in. And I spent maybe like 60, 70 hours that week just making pasta. I was staying in this villa, whatever, like this room. It was like this living room that was like a communal space for everyone, but everyone was gone. And I converted it into like my pasta lab for the week. And I had pasta drying on couches, on chairs, on tables everywhere. And I was just really every morning I'd wake up, like have my coffee, then go and just like make pasta the whole day. And that's when I kind of found that spark and really enjoyed sort of going in and really getting to this place where I could feel like I was progressing, but also feel like, yeah, it was also this meditative thing for me as well. And so that's when I got really into pasta. And to this day, I feel like it's just something that also I feel like keeps me connected to the tradition of Italian food and cooking. And there's also something about, making pasta that it's not just about how much you can earn from making pasta. Like there's this one pasta shape that I make. It's called trofie. I have a tattoo of it on my hand because I'm in love with it so much. But it's basically become obsolete from a commercial perspective. Like it's no longer handmade for commercial purposes or very infrequently because it's just so time consuming to make. But in this region of Italy, in Liguria, there's still all of these nanas that are spending every day making trofie just for their families, just to like have pasta that they can serve to their families and friends in the community. And so it's like, they are doing it for the love of doing it, for the love of serving other people. And I kind of really resonated with that as well, that like not everything that you do should be, what are the dollars and cents, but like, how do you kind of do something that feels more like it's about taking care of somebody else? And I think I find that really enriching as well.
Mm, sort of investing in that, something that is time consuming, but a craft in order to bring joy to
Yeah.
others.
To bring joy, to somehow, I feel like connect with tradition as well, to know that this was the way it's been done for, I don't even know how long it goes back. So I don't want to say like definitely decades, maybe a century. I'm not sure how long. But still to be able to feel like you're doing something that, people have been doing for a while. And as a Chinese person cooking Italian food, I feel like I want to have a specific connection to the culture as well. Maybe I was Italian in a previous life, who knows? But
There were certainly a lot of similarities in the cuisines, right?
Yeah.
And so in terms of like the pasta noodle making, I think even
And
now when
also
I
just
when I
like,
eat spaghetti, I eat it with chopsticks, which I'm sure is a crime in Italy, but it's the only way I know how to do it neatly.
I feel like it's, going back to, the way I fell in love with food with like my grandma cooking for like all of these people at home, this like the Italian nonna is also this like
Mm,
grandma maternal figure, and this kind of Sundays at nonna's very much is similar to like when my grandma used to have all these people over and would cook for them. So I think
mm,
there's that kind of connection as well.
awesome. Well, I'd love to, upon closing our episode, to ask you a couple of questions I ask all my guests. And the first one is, what's your go-to comfort food?
I don't get it here in Berlin that often, but for me, it's wonton noodles. And there's something about, maybe it's like childhood memories, but I think noodle soup in general is something that's just like so, you take a spoonful of soup, noodle soup, and you're just like healed inside. And so I think that's what I oftentimes, especially in this cold winter in Berlin, I find myself reaching for like warm broths and noodles. But specifically, if I can get my hands on it, it's like wonton noodles. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you were to cook for someone you treasure, what would you have on the menu and why?
I think it is like right now it's trophy because of like the amount of effort and labor that goes into it, to each individual piece is probably around half a gram. And so if you think about a portion of pasta, it's maybe 100 grams. So you're rolling 200 individual pieces of pasta per person. So it's a lot of time and effort. But if I was like having a small group of friends over, that would be like my way of expressing love to them.
That's gorgeous. And what lucky friends you have. So thank you so much for joining me here today, Peter. And I hope to be able to make a booking at Kenzy soon.
Yes, would love to host you anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Peter Sum for sharing your food memories, lived experiences, and insights on following your hunger and the joy of mastering a skill. Also, for reminding us that the most powerful paths are often the ones we find by looking inward first. Learn more about Peter's culinary adventures, including Kenzy Supper Clubs, pasta workshops, and collaborations across Berlin's food community through his social media linked in the show notes. If this conversation sparked something for you, share this episode with one colleague who needs to hear it. And be sure to engage with the Foodagogy Transfers resource, where you can dig deeper into the 4 big themes arising from this episode. Before you go, what's one idea from this conversation you're taking back to enhance your practice? Maybe it's questioning how diverse future pathways are truly celebrated by your school and made visible. Or perhaps it's finding ways to help students stay curious about themselves, not just about their subjects that they're learning. Or simply creating more room in your learning community for the kind of slow, deep, joyful practice that builds real craft and meaning. Share your thoughts with a friend, colleague, or student, and connect with me on LinkedIn to share your takeaways. And with that, we close the table on season 1 of Foodagogy. 8 episodes, 8 remarkable guests, 8 invitations to think differently about food, identity, education, and belonging. I am so deeply grateful to every guest who joined me to share their stories, and to every one of you who has listened, shared, and kept this conversation going. Foodagogy is free to listen to and free to access, but it is not free to make. If season 1 has nourished your thinking, your practice, or your community, please consider helping us to bring season 2 to life. If you, your school, or your organization would like to sponsor the next season or an individual episode, I would love to hear from you. Reach out directly through the links in the show notes. Every possibility about partnership is welcome. Or you can simply buy me a coffee. Subscribe and follow Foodagogy so you are first to know when season 2 begins. Until next time, keep following your passions with a curious beginner's mindset. I'm Angeline Aow, and 多谢晒, grazie, thank you for tuning into Foodagogy. Foodagogy is produced by EKG Collective, with editing by Jitani Heveo and Kirk McDavitt. Music by Paul Romain and artwork by Svi David. Special thanks to Trisha Friedman and Frank Jung for sharing podcasting expertise and encouraging the birth of Foodagogy.